This is Mathilene Broadcasting Corporation. Inspired, inspire.
Continents. They are countries that have experienced the most intense genocides that left behind broken families, that left pain and suffering and hatred and just collective trauma, man, for the countries that were affected. And I want us to reflect on such genocides, their impact, the healing journey for the affected countries. What's being done to avoid history repeating itself? Was there accountability? And what are the lessons for countries that haven't traversed that path? And today we're going to start this series by looking at the Gukurahundi genocide, which started in Zimbabwe in the 1980s. It was such a dark and tragic period in that country that left an indelible mark, shaping the country's politics, shaping its society as well. There was violence that primarily targeted the Ndebele ethnic group, which was led by the late Joshua Ngoma, who was a prominent political rival of Robert Mugabe. 20,000 people died. These are civilians who died as a result of that genocide. Thousands more were tortured. They were raped, they were brutalized, their homes and all their possessions were destroyed. And there are thousands more people that were displaced. And it's a genocide that was seemingly state-led under the leadership of then Prime Minister Robert Mugabe and his ruling party ZANU-PF. But what Mugabe, ZANU-PF and the government have done, it's very little to acknowledge the scale and the scope of the Gukurahundi violence. So if you have been affected, if you have a loved one who was affected by this genocide, I'm interested to hear from you. Maybe it's something you've read about. You're welcome to join this conversation and give your input on 011-883-0702. You can send me a WhatsApp on 072-702-1702. Sipho Malunga is a human rights lawyer and director of the Open Society Initiative of South Africa, and he's actually just completed his PhD in genocide, focusing on Gukurahundi. So this is someone who's best placed to talk about this particular subject. Sipho, thank you for making time for us, man. Good morning.
Good morning, Clemens. Thank you so much, and thank you to your listeners for taking the time to listen.
Help us understand the historical background and the context of the Gukurahundi massacre in Zimbabwe. What happened?
So the genocide in Zimbabwe occurred, against the backdrop of a political fallout between, erstwhile allies in the liberation struggle for freedom in Zimbabwe. As you know, Zimbabwe, like South Africa, was under apartheid. It was ruled by a white racial minority, and the two liberation movements, ZAPU and ZANU, and their armed forces, ZANDA and ZIPRA, fought the war to liberate Zimbabwe. So at independence, there was a fallout between the two movements, ZANU and ZAPU, and they contested the election, the first independent election, separately, So ZANU won the election with 57 seats, while ZAPU obtained 20. And of course, the fact that ZAPU was able to retain seats largely in part of Midlands and Matabeleland was a serious concern for ZANU, then Prime Minister Robert Mugabe, who made it a point to literally teach ZAPU and ZAPU supporters in Matabeleland the lesson. And as soon as the election was held, he signed a contract with the North Koreans to train a small brigade, a militia literally, to go and root out what had emerged as dissidents. So and then this dissidents, a few ZIPRA elements in the National Army had defected because they felt they were being persecuted and killed. And some of their commanders, like Tumiso Javengwa and others, Lookout Masu, had been jailed by ZANU. And of course, my father as well, he was a senior ZAPU official at the time. They were jailed, they were tried for treason in jail, and acquitted, and of course, then still kept in prison. So then Mugabe unleashed this brigade called the Gukurahundi. It was the 5th Brigade of the National Army on Matabeleland, and it committed unspeakable, horrific atrocities against the people of Matabeleland.
What was the impact then? So when Mugabe unleashed this on these dissidents, on the political opponents, how many people died and how were people in Matabeleland affected?
Thank you. Good question. So the brigade never made any effort to tackle the dissidents. And the dissidents at their height, I think the number was less than 300, 400. They used to move in small groups. So they really renegades, completely unorganized. They made no effort. This brigade made no effort. The brigade comprised about 3,000 to 3,500, specially trained by the Koreans, indoctrinated politically. They made no effort. They simply targeted civilians. They went into villages and they beat and tortured and killed thousands and thousands of civilians, and they raped thousands of young girls and women in Matabeleland. They went from village to village, literally attacking and traumatizing and terrorizing the villagers. And during the period, they also put in place a curfew. Remember, this was a period when there was a serious drought in the country, especially in Matabeleland. So that meant that there could be no food aid that went in. So thousands more people died from starvation. That was the most horrific thing. It's one of the hidden genocides in Africa, but one of the most horrific ones, if I may say. So the impact is this, right? So there's mass graves still in Matabeleland. The whole of Matabeleland is littered with mass graves. So they would kill people. They would go from village to village, round up villagers, beat them up, torture them, and then make them dig graves and put them in the graves and bury them, sometimes alive, and sometimes they'll shoot them. And then they'll take the women and the young girls into the bush and rape them. And then sometimes they'll take the women into the camps, the military camps that were in the area, and keep them there for days, even months, for that matter, raping them. So as a result, a lot of the women and young girls, they got pregnant, and they obviously because of this, through these rapes, a lot of the young men were killed. A lot of the young men ran away, they fled, and a lot of them disappeared. They'd also take people from villages, and the people would simply disappear. So there were two different strategies for this horrific attack. So in the early part of it, in 1983, from the end of January, early February, Ukuraunji was deployed in Matabeleland North, which is Cholojo, and they went from village to village, literally terrorizing villagers. But because of the outcry and because of the news that started coming out and the complaints about this to the Prime Minister, they then shifted their strategies when they were then redeployed to Matabeleland North, Matabeleland South in 1984, where they set up a huge base, a concentration camp, almost like Auschwitz. If you read about the Jews and the Auschwitz, they set up a concentration camp called Balagwe. It was a military camp, and they used to go out into the villages and collect villagers and bring them to the camp and keep them in these cramped cells. And they'll take them out and beat them and torture them, and they'll rape the women there. And then they'll kill people. So the torture, they'll kill people, and then they'll throw them in mine dumps. So if you know a little bit about Matabeleland, you'll know that in the Matabeleland South is where the gold mining area. There's a lot of mines there. So there's mine shafts there. So that's what they would do. They started burying them initially, but of course there was no space to bury people around this Balagwe concentration camp. They ended up now throwing them in mine shafts. So there's thousands of people in mine shafts in the Matabeleland South.
Sure, Sipho. Are you telling me that all of this devastation was because one man wanted to deal with a political opponent, and one man felt that there was an escalating, I suppose, existential threat to the state and to their power, and they went through all of that just because they wanted to deal with an opponent?
Absolutely, yes. And you see, it's shocking. I mean, I hear people talk about Robert Mugabe as a liberation hero, and the man committed a genocide in the 1980s. He killed thousands. thousands of people. And it was for power, I agree, because he was very clear when the election results came in 1980. He concluded, and his lieutenant Zobo said, look, it's quite clear that the people of Matabeleland are not willing to accept Mugabe as their leader because there were 20 seats. Remember, Matabeleland Nkomo, Joshua Nkomo won 20 seats largely in Midlands and Matabeleland. And why did he win 20 seats in Matabeleland? Because Mugabe had unleashed violence and terror everywhere else during the 1980 election. The 1980 election that Mugabe won with 57, this was a very violent election. Mugabe unleashed his guerrillas from the war on poor villagers in Mashonaland, Manicaland, and other parts of Midland. So that's why he was able to win the 57 seats using violence. So the template of using violence to win elections is not new in Zimbabwe. It's still continuing. So, but when the results came out and they realized that the people of Matabeleland and Midland, part of Midland, had voted overwhelmingly for Joshua Nkomo, who had been quite popular, maybe more popular, who started the liberation struggle. Remember, Mugabe used to work under Joshua Nkomo in Zapu before he broke off. So he then decided, and he stated this openly, that the people of Matabeleland need to be reoriented. That was his word. They need to be reoriented, and that meant they need to be taught a lesson. So he unleashed this group of militia, literally. It wasn't even an army of any sort. And they went and committed these atrocities to stay in power. That's the template. That's how ZANU-PF stays in power.
How did ZAPU respond?
Well,
Through its military wing.
I'll tell you how ZAPU responded. So, because remember that many of the targets of the Gukuraundi were former ZIPRA members, some of whom had left the army. So many of them were killed. So when the Gukuraundi was going out into the villages, they were looking for a list of young men or anybody who had served in ZIPRA. They were also looking for a list of people who were officials of ZAPU. They killed all the leadership, the political leadership of ZAPU, from district chairman to provincial chairman. Yeah. Whoever they found in the village who was associated with ZAPU was killed. And they took people and they murdered them and they disappeared people. There's thousands of people who disappeared. They just simply disappeared. Nobody knows where they went. They were taken by the army, by the Central Intelligence Organization, by the police, and nobody has ever seen them again. So this was the strategy, you know.
Yeah, Sipho, I want you to tell us, because the thing about such tragic things happening and genocides is that if there's no appropriate response from a government and government is intentional about helping the nation heal even from that collective trauma, there are people that will continue to live in Zimbabwe and they're still going to be traumatized and scared of not just the political leaders, but maybe people from other ethnic groups because of what was perpetrated towards them. So I want you to talk to me, to talk to us about what was the impact on the psyche of Zimbabwe, the impact of this genocide on the psyche of Zimbabwe, and has government done enough to acknowledge the scale and the scope of the Gukurahundi violence? But before you respond to that, I want to take some calls on 011-883-0702. There are some WhatsApps coming through as well on 072-702-1702. Let's start with Ndumiso, who's calling us from the Northwest. Ndumiso, good morning.
Morning, sir. Are you?
I'm all right, man. Go ahead.
Yeah. I was listening from the one who said they just disappeared some people.
Yeah.
Now, on the view of my side, what I can tell you, the government keep on saying we're gonna resolve this, but the problem that we are facing as Matabeleland people, not Matabeleland as such. In Matabeleland there's 7 languages, but on those languages, nobody who is benefiting from any resources that is in Matabeleland. Then, wherever you can go on all borders, that country got many borders, but there's no other language that who is working on those borders besides people from Mashon.
And you yourself, Ndumiso, how were you affected by that genocide?
I didn't have access to many studies. Like I'm supposed to maybe to go to high school, but I end up on grade 7, which is it wasn't enough. Even if I can speak English, I was supposed to be more than how I speak.
Were your parents there?
I only lived with my grandmother. My mother just killed. It's very painful. As a man, I can cry the way they describe how they killed my mother and my father. So now, I'm a member. If you used to see on social media, there is a party that they call MRP, which is in Tower, the Republic Party. I'm a member, which is the party that stand up for people for Matabeleland. Wherever the part of Matabeleland, that's the party that stand up for people, trying to force the government to resolve the issues. Whenever I go to school, our language, I'm in the bed, but how come a person from Mashonaland who doesn't know my language, but want to teach my child with the Shona language, which the child doesn't understand that?
Sure. Dumiso, thank you for calling, and I'm sorry, man, to hear about your parents. His parents were killed during the genocide. Tabani, you're in Joburg. Hi.
Hi, good morning.
Hi, Tabani, go ahead.
Yes, I'm also from Matabeleland. Thank you that you bring this program on Limelight. Yes, I suffered a lot. I remember I ran away from my rural area to the then to Bulawayo, because my father is also a zebra man. So we were told that all the zebra families were gonna be one way or the other killed. So I walked on foot, because by that time transport was closed. There was no food that was coming through. Everything was blocked for us. So we were, number one, we were hungry. Number two, we were being tortured. Yeah. I remember one of my grandfathers was assaulted. I don't know how to call it, but it is called a coal blocking stick. I don't know whether in the coal you know how to, that stick that blocks the cows from not going in. He was assaulted using that stick. Yeah. And there are so many things that happened. So I was forced with my family to run away to Bulawayo on foot during the day and during the night.
How many kilometers is that?
It's more than 80 kilometers. I don't know exactly, but it's more than like 80 kilometers.
Sure. Tabani, thank you for sharing that experience with us. Here's a voice note that also come through.
Good afternoon, Clement. The stuff of genocide, you are touching something that is very personal to me. You know, around 1983, I'm sure I was like 14, 15 years when the Kukura attacked people from Matabeleland. The killing was so painful. People were shot and killed in front of us, and we were kids by then. Some of them, their stomachs were cut open. The only thing that caused that thing is for us as Ndebele's people refusing to support ZANU and supporting Nkomo. So we're taken as enemies. You know, that thing, Chairman, is not getting out of my mind. I always sit and think, one day if I can get a chance to one of the South African radio station, I can go and represent these things, because it's painful. Very, very, very painful. I saw a woman, but she passed away recently, where a firewood was taken from the fire and shoved between her legs, just because she was told that she was sleeping with this dent.
Sure. I mean, some of these stories are just shocking, and I know I appreciate that there are some listeners that may find some of these explanations sensitive. So please bear with us. But if you feel it's too much, we also understand some of the stories being told. But these are the realities. This is what people were subjected to. Sipho Wami, the question I was asking you earlier: what has government done to heal the nation and to avoid history repeating itself?
Clement, the answer is very simple. They've done absolutely nothing. As a starting point, they've stifled any conversation about Kukraundi. They continue to terrorize people who speak about it. They intimidate people who speak about it. They arrest people who speak about it. They stop people commemorating their loved ones. When villagers and communities put up memorial plaques, when they try to go and commemorate, their loved ones, the government stops them, they arrest them. The government has gone even as far as blowing up memorial plaques of people. They've done absolutely nothing. They've pretended to do something. They've set up a commission which did absolutely nothing. And they continue to intimidate people who speak about it, including myself. So that's what they've done. Nothing. They would really rather nothing. They would really rather nothing is said about it and part of the reason is that the people who committed Kukraundi, who were at the forefront of it, are part of the government now. Some of them leading the government.
Yeah, sure. Got you there. Let me just take the last call. Ishmael in Woodmead. Quickly, good morning. Hi, Ishmael.
Hello, Clement. How are you doing?
I'm alright, man. I've got 10 seconds for you. Go ahead.
Yeah, Clement, I was a victim of that Kukraunda in Cholo. So, I was young then, but I saw my mother being beaten by these Mugabe soldiers. They were looking for my father. They kept on asking my mother, where's your husband? Where's your husband? But my father then was working in South Africa. So they beat her. It was like rushing your current being beaten.
Sure, Ishmael. Thank you for sharing that experience with us. And Da says, Clement, while black South Africans see their oppressors being the bulls or the whites, then Ndebeles and Zim still see Shonas as their oppressors to this day, as the Kukurahundi put much fear in them to this very day. That's a message there from Ndaba. Sipho Malunga, thank you so much for joining us for this conversation. It's a minute before 11.